out like they were not ready to play. And this happened in 1/3 of your games. A coach, Sean Payton, that is an offensive-minded genius, as people like to proclaim he is, would never come out playing like that. And go check the games out. They scored nothing but, I think, a field goal in the first half against the Giants. They scored a field goal against Denver in the first half, a field goal against Carolina. They scored a field goal against Detroit, and 5 points against Tampa Bay. That is not a Sean Payton offense, So whatever has happened, that the offense plays so inconsistent, does not equate with that your coach is a great play caller. Now, some of it could have been the players, some of it could have been the play caller. Whatever it does, it ultimately falls back on the head coach. And that's why I think people are questioning what has happened to Coach Payton in terms of play calling, and is he a great coach? I think that's what some of the debate is being discussed.
Good point. And one last point that I will have to elaborate on is the fact that we've got to stop looking at stats as just the way to say a person is great or not. I'm not saying, let's use Drew Brees as an example. Drew Brees will be hitting well over the 5,000-yard plateau a game. This game coming up, and that's awesome. But these stats are not translating into W's. And I'm pretty sure Drew would sacrifice hundreds of yards off of his passing statistics if we would have more rushing statistics to help us control the ball, convert important first downs in critical parts of the game. And that's one thing people keep on forgetting. The stats are good to say, look at great we are, number 1 at this, number 2 here, number 3 there, and over the past 10 years we were the best doing this and that and the other. But is it really translating into the most important stat? A W versus the L. And that's what we have to really look at, guys. The wins are the most important factor in how you manage in the game as a coach, player is the most important factor. It's not the stats. And we've got to get off of these fantasy football ways of thinking to think just because a guy throws 5,000 yards in the season that all of a sudden we have to anoint them as the MVP of the league, right? Or a coach just because he directs the number 1 efficient offense in the red zone or number 1 total offense that he's a great play caller, where there were, again, important junctures and critical junctures within the games that we lost. The play calling was suspect, guys. So we've got to see more consistency. And I think this team is capable, more than capable, with the talent that we have, and especially the young talent that going in next year, they're going to mature. They're going to do well. And we've got to reduce these penalty yards, the type of penalties. We had too many silly penalties that happened that cause teams to continue drives and cause us to lose drives as well. So as a whole, we just have a lot of other important aspects and teaching aspects that need to be addressed by the assistant coaches as well as the head coach.
Yeah, and Kyle, you bring up a good point about the stats, because people go by stats, and fantasy football has driven this behavior. And that's why I'm not a big proponent of fantasy football, because it is pushing people to look at the game in terms of stats versus actually to just watch and enjoy the game. And that's one of my biggest problems why I don't play fantasy football. And fantasy football has driven this behavior. because if it doesn't, for me, if it doesn't equate to wins, even making the playoffs or even a Super Bowl, then guess what? It's just flash and dash.
Flash and dash.
I think
right.
this year with the Pro Bowl voting that the people didn't go off of Drew's stats. They looked at the Saints' record at the time, and I think at that time the Saints were 5-8. And they was like, well, he got all the yardage and stats, but Aaron Rodgers and Matt Ryan and Dak Prescott are winning. And so, it just, at this point, it's just time for everybody, us to attribute the stats and see them equate to wins. And I'm hoping next year for the Saints that will occur, because Coach Payton has been the greatest Saints coach ever. That, I will give him that credit. He has brought the most success and everything. So
and giving us a lot of hope as well every time we take the field.
A lot of hope, yes. And so, I would like, we don't know what's going to happen with him. If next year is he and Drew's last year, whatever, I would like to see them go out in style. Or if not, they turn it around and they're able to remain here. But you've got to start winning again, because the people now are getting a little downcast, not just with the Saints, but the Pelicans and LSU. All of the sports in the Louisiana area has been a downcast in 2016. And we would like to see all three teams to turn it around and bring back some joy, because, we love our sports in New Orleans. So I'm just hoping things turn around and work out for everybody involved. I've stated this publicly, I'll state it again. If it is time to release Coach Payton and even Drew, let's not be selfish people to just hold these gentlemen. They've done what they're supposed to do. They brought us a championship. I just want the best for Coach Payton and for Drew. And if that means they have to leave New Orleans, then I can accept that, because they did what they were supposed to do. They did something no one else ever did, something I never thought I would see in my lifetime. So forever in my heart, Coach Payton and Drew Brees will be, effectually thought upon, in my heart in a positive manner, So, and I know sometimes I am very harsh or in the things that I may state about the Saints and Coach Payton, but it's just coming out of fact and love, never to hurt anybody. I don't get into talking about people, they're stupid or this and that. And I've heard commentators call Saints players, stupid and all of that on some of these radio shows, and I think that is totally distasteful. You should never insult a man. I don't care if he's not playing the greatest, but I have heard it on some of the other stations that broadcast Saints games, and I think that is distasteful. I may not agree with your play or your play calling, but I'm not going to get on the air and call Coach Payton and Drew Brees names, or any Saints player for that matter. They're unintelligent or this and that. And I think that is very distasteful. Successful. I want to see his team in the best manner, and if it's time to transition, then we'll all have to accept it. If it's time to keep them, then we'll accept that too. But the most important thing, let's get back to winning Saints football that we were accustomed to from 2006 all the way to 2013. That's my only hope.
Well said. And one last thing, you brought up a very important name. This young man has directed the Dallas Cowboys to a 13-3 record. He's completed 68.1% of his passes, only for 3,613 yards, 23 touchdowns, 4 interceptions, a 105.6 quarterback rating. He does have one important person to help him out in the rushing game, Ezekiel Elliott. Right? So you have a guy there who's put up, 1,600 yards on the ground to help complement him. That's all I'm saying. We have a guy who is 37, about to be 38 next January, right? So therefore, if you're going to have a Heisman Trophy guy who we know he can put up over 100 yards per game if you just feed him the rock like we need to, and to have a 43-4 record when you rush as a coach, as a head coach, stats better than anybody else. They're 43-4 when they rush the ball more than 30 times a game. The Saints this season have only rushed the football 25.4 yards per game. We only rush per game yardage 107. That's a key reason, guys, why we are not in the playoff hunt. We're not rushing the ball more. That's just one factor. There are many more, and we can talk about those, but we just got to be able to call it like it is. Okay? Do we have the offensive talent? Yes. Can we be a playoff team? I really believe we can be a Super Bowl team with some of these guys on the team.
Kyle, I think this year, once again, like I said, in 13, I said in 11 and 10, the Saints have blown another opportunity because of the intangibles being met. Because this team can hold its own against Atlanta and Dallas in terms of offense. And it was even quoted with a Dallas sports person, was reported to me by Ty Beasley, one of our reporters for Professor Speaks, that in Dallas, the gentleman stated that the NFL is really losing out with the Saints not being in the playoffs because they're one of the more entertaining teams that would have posed a threat for Atlanta and Dallas and Seattle, any of those teams. But because of the Saints' mistakes with penalties, special teams problems, and at times breakdowns with the defense, as well as a lot of turnovers by the offense, they lost games that they had no business losing. And this is the issue that I have had with Coach Payton, is that this team has lost 22 games by 8 points or less over the last, since 2012. Each of these years, 12, 13, 12, 14, even 13, which was a win year, 12, 13, 14, 15, and 16, the Saints have lost a minimum of 4 games that they lost by 6 points or less. 8 points to that or less that they should have won. And if you go back to those games, you'll see in those games either a drive was stalled because of a penalty, a turnover occurred, or they had a lead and the defense collapsed on the fourth quarter or on the last drive, and that's how they lost the game. And so that is the area. Since the San Francisco game, it looked like the Saints never gained their thunder of being able to close out games ever since that devastating loss in 2012, January of 2012, when we lost to San Francisco in that heartbreaking game. And it seems like this team has never. This year, the Saints are 3-7 in close games and against teams with winning records. In fact, with teams with winning records, they're 2-7. The only 2 teams that beat with a winning record was Seattle and Tampa Bay. The other 7 games, they lost. And you've got to fix that, because if you cannot beat, teams with winning records, then your 7-8 record is a facade, because you've beaten teams with poor records. You've not beaten anybody with a tough record consistently. So this game against Atlanta can make a big statement if they can come here to Atlanta and, upset the Falcons on their home turf. That would be a positive way to end the season and to bring some momentum going back into the next season. And then finally, Coach Payton has to figure out how to get his team motivated in the first and third quarters of their season. The Saints' breakdowns are occurring at the beginning of their season when they come out and they're either 1-3, 0-4. They're not starting their seasons right, which does not give them much room to lose games later in the season. And then in the third quarter of their seasons, they're going 1-3. We'll be lucky if they go 2-2 at best. And they're not playing in the first and third quarters of their seasons. So then they wind up winning a bunch of games in October, and then they win a bunch of games in December. But by that point, you've lost too many games in the first and third quarter that you're not going to make the playoffs. So when you get into 4-4, you only have about 2 more games you can lose for the rest of your season, and the Saints are not that down enough to go 6-2 anymore like they used to. When they went on that run in 2011, when they got to 5-3 and had that upsetting loss in Tampa Bay and the Rams, they came back on a warpath. They won a game in Atlanta, and next thing you know, they just went on a warpath and won 9 games straight in a row, including the playoffs. They beat Detroit.